Friday, Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Slowly, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we begin yet another brand new project here in the Regional Rasslin world, a very unique project. For me, anyway, I've been looking forward to doing this for years. I mean, I told the gentleman who's going to be joining me here in a moment that this was something I wanted to do even before I got into the podcasting world based on the old fan bulletins I was collecting, something that had opened my eyes to a new promotion, a new outlaw territory, if you will. We're going to go back in time to the 1960s, 70s, and close up shop by the end of this, closing out into the early 1980s. That's how long this outlaw territory would exist. I'm talking about Henry Rogers and his promotion in Malden, Missouri. They're every Saturday night for the better part of a quarter of a century. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome back. It's been a bit. We've covered the Jarrett Gulas split of the 1970s in Tennessee. We've covered ICW, the Angelo Poffo Outlaw Organization, and now we're going to cover Mr. Henry Rogers and Malden, Missouri. Please welcome back Mr. Research, Mr. On Assignment. He is the one and only Steve Crawford. Welcome back to Regional Rasslin, brother.
Hey, great to be back. Let's see, our last project was ICW Wrestling. That was a whole lot of fun. Yep. This was we're getting even more niche. This is about as niche as you can get.
Just about.
Malden, Missouri.
Wow.
The famous promotion of Henry Rogers that ran, at least we know, from the 60s to the 80s. There are some things online that looks like he promoted longer than I have records for personally. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. Online it says he promoted from 63 to 87. I don't have records of all of that. But a very interesting little promotion, affiliated with the Memphis promotion for a lot of its time, and affiliated with Phil Golden's All-Star promotion in the early 70s. So, right. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in our next one, but we're going to kind of cover the 60s today and kind of, it wasn't always in Malden, which is interesting. And that's what we'll kind of cover today, how it kind of evolved into Malden.
The Malden territory didn't necessarily, well, it's kind of started in Malden, but it didn't stay in Malden early on. So it's kind of funny to call it Malden when it's not in Malden. But Henry Rogers, guys, for those of you who don't know, was a promoter, as mentioned here, promoted in and around the Malden area of Missouri. And Old Hank, as I'll affectionately refer to him here and piss off a lot of historians. You know, when I made a post about this, just really quick at the top of the program, there were a lot of responses to people who claimed they'd either worked for Henry Rogers or knew him as affectionately as they referred to him as Mr. Henry. And Henry Rogers, born in 1930, passes away in 2012. But thanks to Steve Crawford and his due diligence when he was not on assignment, this was not, in fact, an assignment. He chose to do this in his free time. So we want to thank Steve for coming back here and doing this with us.
Yeah, fun stuff. I grew up like 45 minutes away from Malden. I never knew that they had weekly wrestling there. I mean, Malden was a town that was just completely outside of, anywhere that we ever traveled, went to. There was just no reason to go to Malden, Missouri. Right. So later on, when I learned about all this history, I was like, holy cow, I could have gone to that when I was a teenager. But actually, not sure how much I would have seen. But anyway, yeah, Malden, in 1960, Malden was a town of about 5,000 people. It's about 2 hours kind of northwest, more north and west of Memphis, and about 3 hours south of St. Louis. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's just one of those small Missouri towns, just like a little bit of small Arkansas town. You're not by any major population center. If you went to, the city once a year, that was a big deal, to go to a city. You were just small town people. So what we know about Henry Rogers, he was in the military during the Korean War era. And I think he actually married his wife while he was in the service, because they got married in a military town in Kansas. He moves to Malden. He opens a Daisy Queen, not a Dairy Queen, but you would see that in small towns where people would open up like a knockoff of a chain restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And they would call it something very similar so people understood, like, oh, this is just like Dairy Queen, but it's Daisy Queen.
Trademarks, pal.
Yeah, there used to be a place up in northern Texas, and I don't think it's open anymore, but we drive by it. And Whataburger is a huge chain in Texas. And this one was What a Burger, not Whataburger, but so, people get very close to those trademark laws, right? So that's where he was. He started promoting regularly, from what I can find, in like 1966. I did find some other, just kind of like one-off spot shows before then, but nothing constant. And then in 1966, he was promoting at this venue what he called the Big Tent, which was on a highway north of Malden. And I can't find anything about the Big Tent. I don't know if it was an actual tent.
I was going to say, is this like Ernie Couch's backyard? I mean, what are we doing here?
I mean, I love to think of it as a tent. I love to think of it as like a permanent, tent structure, and churches out there on a Sunday morning, and Henry Rogers is having wrestling on a Saturday night or something like that. Don't know what it was for sure. When he started in 66 and through the 60s, you'll see that he's really using the Gulas booking office. So he's really a local promoter for Gulas for quite some time. So after, he started in June, and it looks like they tried to get a hot angle going. Here's a little story from the Malden newspaper. So basically, all these information is from the Malden newspaper over the years where he lived. So on June 23rd, 1966, there's a story, wrestling fans to see grudge match tonight. A grudge match is on tap for Malden, Missouri wrestling fans at the Big Tent on Highway 25 North, where Herb Welch and Dwayne Peele, and of course we know who Dwayne Peele was, right?
Sure.
You don't know who Dwayne Peele was?
I recognize the name, but no.
Oh man, and I just blanked out on it. It's the guy that promoted all the small towns in Arkansas forever, and his son was a wrestler.
Ken Wayne,
we'll get there.
Right? Is that a P?
Yeah.
Ken Peele, right?
Buddy Wayne,
okay.
yeah, Buddy Wayne.
Okay, Buddy Wayne. Okay, all right. I knew I'd seen the name.
We both blinked out at the same time. Anyway, Herb Welch and Dwayne Peele to take on Rowdy Red Roberts and Big Jerry Dean in a 60-minute match. Jerry Dean would later be known as Rip Tyler, so a pretty big name in Gulf Coast wrestling later on.
Yeah.
So they were in a 60-minute match. The opening match was Ted McCarthy, what a wrestling name, Ted McCarthy, against Treacherous Phillips, sometimes known as Tretch Phillips.
Oh, yeah.
Starting at 7:30 p.m. Now, here we get into the angle. Last week, Red Roberts was the winner over Herb Welch when Welch couldn't answer the bell for the third fall. In the second fall, Big Jerry Dean jumped into the ring and helped beat up Welch. Dwayne Peele came running from the dressing room to help Welch and was thrown away from the ring by Big Dean. This aroused the crowd, and some even attempted to rush to Welch's aid. The referee refused to disqualify Roberts, and Welch asked for a return tag team match this week. So there you go. They got a hot angle running in Malden. They got a return match going on.
Hot angle and early on here, because we're going to see much later when we continue into the 70s, even into the early 80s with the results and whatnot. Not a lot of names, familiar names by that point, but like you mentioned, doing the Gulas, the Welch office here, Herb Welch himself, and we're going to see some of Herb's trainees later on that will become familiar names of the wrestling business. But no, just name dropping a lot of this talent early on. You could definitely tell this was kind of ran with the authority or the proper backing of Gulas in regards to sending the talent.
Yeah, absolutely. That pretty much throughout the 60s, especially at Malden and Hayti, which we'll get to, it was pretty much all Gulas talent. And here's a card from August 18th, 1966. And I just wanted, this is kind of the layout of how their cards worked for years. So you have 6 wrestlers that you book for the night. How do you maximize 6 wrestlers? So you have the main event, Rowdy Red Roberts, Jerry Dean, and the Mad Mongol, who I have no idea who the Mad Mongol was, versus Herb Welch, Dynamite Lay. Now that's a name. Dynamite. It was actually Charlie Lay. Dynamite Lay. That's a great name. Paul Heyman could have done wonders with that. And Bobby Whitlock. So that's a main event, and it was probably 2 out of 3 falls, right? It was probably milking time.
Right.
So in the middle match was Jerry Dean versus Dynamite Lay. The opener was Red Roberts versus Bobby Whitlock. So you basically took the same guys, and you would have 6 or 8 guys, and they would wrestle singles matches or tag team matches, and then you'd end the night with a 6-man or 8-man match was typically, how they worked it. So where were some of these guys working? So like in August of 1966, some of the people I just mentioned, just to kind of get a feel. Herb Welch was working in Memphis, Nashville, and Blytheville. Herb was I think 56 years old at this time. He was still regularly main eventing in Memphis at the time. He lived in Dyersburg. They would talk about him doing training on his farm in Dyersburg. Malden's approximately an hour away from Dyersburg, Tennessee. So I'm sure it was an easy trip for him versus, going to Chattanooga or someplace else. So it was probably just an easy night. Red Roberts was an older wrestler, and he was just working the smaller towns. He wasn't fully on the circuit at this point. So I show him matches in Blytheville, Arkansas, Helena, Arkansas, Jonesboro. And so I think sometimes they would have guys working the main circuit, and then they have guys just working spot show circuits. Jerry Dean was mentioned, the future Rip Tyler. He was working as a masked medic in Alabama and then working under his own name in Helena, Arkansas, and on what would later become the Jarrett side of the territory. It wasn't yet, but right. I guess they still had 2 sides of the territory in a way, if he's working a gimmick in Alabama, not working the same gimmick. And he would spend a lot of time in Malden for several years. So I don't know if he had a second wife in Malden or what was his attraction to Malden, Missouri. Right. But Rip Tyler was there an inordinate amount of time for someone who was just a working wrestler.
I see what you're getting at there.
Yeah. So Charlie Lay, Dynamite Lay, I'd never heard of this guy until about a month ago. There was a guest of program on Jim Cornette's podcast, and he mentioned that he was a long-time top babyface in East Tennessee, which I was not aware of. And then Bobby Whitlock was working Birmingham and Helena too. So you got guys working all the way. I mean, Birmingham, Alabama to Malden, Missouri. That's quite a trip during that time. But basically, they're getting kind of the mid-card guys and the guys that aren't even full-time on the circuit are working Malden, Missouri. So just to contrast this, I kind of said, okay, who's the top guys in Memphis in 1966? Well, shockingly, the top guy was Jackie Fargo. He was in 26 main events that year. Herb Welch was in 15. So that was kind of surprising. The Von Brauners, big tag team. There were a lot of main events. Luke Graham, Al Costello. I have not mentioned anybody yet that's been on a Malden card.
Correct.
Steve Kovacs, Saul Weingroff, Tojo. Here's some interesting names just from a historical perspective. Hiro Matsudo and Kanjei Inoki.
Yeah, wow. That shocked me. When I was reading your notes.
Yeah, as a top heel in the beginning of 1966 in Memphis, Inoki was.
No wonder he went back to Japan and just stayed there. I mean, after going through, really quickly before we get too far off topic, though, Charlie Lay would go on to work in the offices for Florida after retiring there.
Okay.
I think Bob Rupert said he was the guy that kind of handed out the checks, down there at the Snake Pit.
Okay, was not aware of that.
And also, if you watch any of the early Mid-South stuff, it's like a figurehead deal because he's not actually there, but I think it's just Bill Watts with a wink and nod. He would reference the for lack of a better term, the commissioner of Mid-South Sports was Charlie Lay. So they had to defer to Charlie Lay to get, any information and things like that. So it was
okay.
Watts a little wink and a nod there because he had been in the Andy Graham office too.
Fun stuff. Good stuff. Some of the other people that were coming through Memphis, Billy Wick was back. The guy that kind of set the promotion on fire in the late 50s was Sputnik. Billy was a part-time wrestler after his first run because he was working for the sheriff's department. but he wasn't making enough money to get by. Right. So he would moonlight as a wrestler. Haystack Calhoun came as Gene Kiniski, the world champion, came in several times. Let's see, any other interesting names as we go through. Luthez was in once, Matt Jewell, Dick the Bruiser, Sputnik Monroe. So like I said, there was kind of like the main event circuit, and then you're getting kind of mid-card, older guys that are coming into these spot shows.
Right.
And I didn't want to read a bunch of wrestling results because I think that, well, I don't even have the results for the most part. I just have the matches that were booked. You know, every once in a while they would reference the results if they were going to try to promote something off of it for the next week.
Right.
Most of the times you really didn't see the results. But I just wanted to kind of go through some of the names that we saw. And he was in Malden kind of through the summer. I think he started about June. And by October of 66, he'd stopped his shows at the Big Tent in Malden. So he's only there for several months during this run. There was a guy named George Allen who wrestled as Gorgeous George Allen. And he would come through Malden a lot later. He had a wrestling bear named Victor. And so that was his gimmick. He got out of wrestling and got himself a bear, and he would do the small town wrestling bear gimmick everywhere. Tarzan Baxter came in, Leon Baxter, who worked a long time in Tennessee in the Gulf Coast area. Cora Combs, female wrestler, the mother of Debbie Combs, pretty famous name in those circles. Rita Cortez was a name I didn't know, a female wrestler, and then I looked her up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I know that name well.
Very interesting history. Yeah, you know the history.
Yeah, sure. I believe the story involves Moolah in some way, shape, or form.
It involves Moolah. So Rita Cortez had an affair with Buddy Lee when Lee was married to the fabulous Moolah. Can you imagine being married to the fabulous Moolah?
No.
Yeah.
You don't even need to finish that sentence.
So Cortez married Lee in 1967 and helped with his Nashville talent agency, which represented at times George Strait, Willie Nelson, Garth Brooks, and the Dixie Chicks. So she probably did much better in life marrying Buddy Lee than she would have as a female wrestler.
Yeah. She knew what she was doing there. And upgrade. I don't even need to see a picture of Rita Cortez. Upgrade for me. in more ways than one. I mean, just not a fan of Moolah. But that's me. No. It's just hard to ever think of her as being an attractive woman. Maybe she was, but who knows? Jerry Dean, as we mentioned, he became Rip Tyler. One of the more famous things about Rip Tyler was he slapped Randy Savage backstage in 1976 when there was a match between Randy and Landy and John Foley and Ted Heath, who were as the English Bulldogs, and that kind of turned into a shoot. And the Poffos were pretty new into the territory, and that didn't go well. They didn't stay in that territory very long. And he's also credited with training Bob Holly, so it's kind of interesting to think of this guy who's working in Hayti in the 1960s, and he's training a guy who was a star generations later, really. Right. Yeah. So those connections goes on. Charlie Lay, who we talked about, he was active from 1933 to 1968, so he had a very long career. He'd held the Georgia light heavyweight title, the Louisiana heavyweight title. So he had been a big star. He's towards the end of his career here, and you would see a lot of that. Dwayne Peele, the name we blanked out on, Buddy Wayne, who was around Memphis forever. I'm probably not going to say this name correctly. Tamayo Soto is how I always pronounced it anyway. Okay, a Peruvian, somebody from Peru. You don't see that too often. No.
He wrestled from 65 to 86. He was part of the Blue Demons tag team. So he worked in a lot of the mask gimmicks for Gulas during those years. Tretch Phillips was, somebody I don't know. I've heard that name a lot in wrestling history. He wrestled from 1952 to 1981. He held titles in Amarillo, Nashville, Oklahoma, and Georgia. And he was kind of in the middle of his career here. He was 37 years old. Red Roberts was 53. He had started wrestling in the mid-1930s. That's pretty wild. Held titles in Arkansas, which I don't know who was promoting Arkansas in the 1930s and 40s. Nashville and the Gulf Coast. He reportedly had hundreds of matches against the Welch brothers, so I guess that's somebody he enjoyed working with.
Clearly, he's still doing it here in the 60s based on the quick results you read already. Yeah.
Herb Welch, who we talked about, he was famous for being a trainer later on, trained David Schultz and Wayne Ferris, who were guys that will be in Malden later in the 70s that we'll talk about when we get to that point. So he obviously had a pretty good relationship with Henry Rogers. Billy Wicks, who we mentioned already. Bobby Whitlock wrestled from the early 60s through the 70s, later became a referee in Kansas City. And he was 30 here. He was about halfway through his career. So they make an announcement in October that they are going to stop the weekly wrestling in Hayti, Missouri, or Malden, Missouri, and they're moving it to Hayti, Missouri. Hayti's a smaller town than Malden. I don't know the population of it. It was known as a very largely African-American town for that part of the country. And they were having wrestling in what they called the old post office building. So I don't know what the old post office building was, but it was big enough to have wrestling cards for weeks on end. So let's talk about like who was coming into Malden in 1967. Like here's a card from June of that year. Bill Sky and Joe Sky versus Corsica Joe and Eric Von Bronner. So those are good sized names in the Tennessee and Gulf Coast territories during that era. Danny Dusek, who I think he was a honorary Dusek. I don't think he was part of the actual Famous Brothers, versus someone named Jack Rico. So, yeah, looking at where these guys had appeared, Bill and Joe Sky were pretty much headliners. So that was a pretty good get for Hayti, Missouri. They had appeared in Chattanooga, Knoxville, Michigan, and Birmingham in the month of June of 1967. And then the promoter said, "You're making too much money. We got to send you to Hayti and humble you a little bit."
Yeah, no kidding. The buttermilk route.
Yeah, the buttermilk route. Corsica Joe had been wrestling Memphis, Nashville, Jonesboro, Helena.
Yeah.
Eric Von Bronner, Chattanooga, Birmingham, Knoxville, Memphis. So, they're getting guys in this area that were stars on the big Gulas circuit at that time. Eric Von Bronner, I think, was a real life brother of the other Von Bronner in the tag team, but he was no longer a part of that team, and he was winding down his career at that point. Danny Dusek was a part-time wrestler, and Jack Rico was appearing throughout the circuit. So he was running on Thursday nights in Hayti. I don't know where else Gulas ran on Thursday nights. I know he ran Chattanooga. I imagine there was probably another major city that he ran on Thursday nights. I imagine this was like town number 3 at the best.
Right.
But I don't know that for sure. But we have more interesting names that are going to show up in 1967. So we have Don Carson worked Hayti in 1967. And when I first saw Don Carson, he was kind of an aging wrestler who used like the loaded glove gimmick.
Yeah.
And then he became a manager for a few years. I thought he was always a very, very entertaining guy. He was working on top in Memphis the next year with a partner, the Red Shadow, who was Dick Dunn. They were on top a very significant time in Memphis during 1968. So he was kind of in the prime of his career here, I would say. Chief White Eagle, a guy named Richard Buster, who would actually work WWF jobs in the early 1970s. He worked one main event in 1967 working with Jackie Fargo. So kind of interesting. They probably just needed to fill a slot.
I guess they needed an Indian gimmick that week, it would seem.
Yeah, an Indian gimmick. Corsica Joe. So I think we've had Corsica Gene and Corsica Joe at different times. Mm-hmm. Sort of a legendary tag team on that circuit. Chico Cortez, also known as Oscar Salazar. He'd held tag team titles with Cyclo Negro in Texas, and he would later wrestle as a Cuban assassin. He was 45 years old here. Danny Dusek, who we mentioned, his real name was Sid Neighbors, and he wrestled until 1974. He was actually 61 years old during this.
All you people complaining about how old John Cena was when he retired, or Edge, or Randy Orton, or anything like that. And these guys are in much better condition now than the olden days, if you will. And so, don't complain, guys. Look, we see here in the South and the Mid-South and et cetera, lots of guys in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s.
Yeah, they were probably salty old bastards, as Cornette would say. And then we get to the Galento brothers.
Oh, yeah.
So first we have, well, I don't know if they were Shoot brothers or not. I could not find that online if they were, but would you be, would you admit you were a brother to Mario Galento if you didn't have to admit it?
No. That's an excellent point. Also, I mean, these guys probably don't know who their brother really is anyway. I mean, they come from the carniest world of carny back in that time period. So
Al Galento wrestled from 1934 to 1974, 40 years. Here's a quote from Ron Fuller. I knew Al Spider Galento. He looked anything but a tough wrestler, but he was a very good shooter. He worked in my father's Gulf Coast territory and Georgia territory. I don't know when he died, but he was a dangerous man if he wanted to be. So his full-time career was already over at this point. He's just working different places part-time, I guess, when he can get booked or maybe for enjoyment. I don't know. Mario Galento, of course, very, very famous and infamous in Memphis. In the 70s, he would go on a Memphis radio station and expose the business. Jerry Jarrett is the boss, and he tells everybody what to do. And then they had the famous studio wrestling show where he shows up and jumps into the ring and tries to hurt Jerry Jarrett. Jarrett claimed he put his eye out, which nobody believes, but it's a good story.
Well, according to Dark Side of the Ring, the eyeball goes rolling across the canvas there. I don't know that that's exactly how that anatomy works, but
somebody used it as a hockey puck later and all that sort of. Mario will show up a lot. We'll have some entertaining Mario information in the early 70s when we get to that portion of Malden. He was homesteading in Malden in the early 70s, interestingly enough.
Sucks to be Malden.
There was a guy named Luis Garcia who worked from 59 to 70, and this is a weird thing. He would split his time between the WWF and Gulas.
You want to talk about two wives,
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's a hell of a that is not only a hell of a drive, but just a hell of a stretch to go from working up there in the New York territory down here to Gulas and back.
Yeah, for being the main territories that somebody works in his career, very odd. Billy Garrett, who became a big name, teaming with Jim Starr. They were the medics and they were the interns. One of the huge heel mass tag teams that were so big in the late 60s, early 70s in Memphis. There was a guy who is alternately called Abe Griffin and Abe Griffith. I'm not sure what's correct, but he was just a part-time worker for Gulas at several times. Al Green shows up in Hayti, legendary heel with his brother Don Green.
Right.
Bob Hamby, he wrestled for about 20 years from late 50s to late 70s. He worked at Pant Clancy in the early 60s in the Gulas territory. So that's one of those things where, after so many years, you figure nobody knows who this guy was and we'll just give him a different name, or he wasn't relevant enough that people would care if you changed his name or whatever the situation was. Jimmy Hyde only stayed about 6 years in the business. He was later known as Percy Bass and Jim Bass because that was just a big name in Southern wrestling circles, with Sam Bass and Ron Bass and Don Bass, and he just had to grab a Bass brother somewhere.
Don't forget Ma Bass.
Ma Bass, absolutely. We'll get to all those in the next show, that's for sure. Matt Jewell, Bearcat Brown, he made. I imagine he was probably a big draw in Hayti.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here. Lots of new stuff happening here at WrestleCopia, and I want to update you on everything going on with the brand right now. First and simple, if you haven't checked out our website at WrestleCopia.com, it's a great way to keep up with the latest episodes of all of your favorite Copia programming, from the Wrestling Memory Grenade to Regional Rasslin with the Territory Talk, the Wrestling Stoop with the legendary Bob Roop, Professor Dan Ginnity and the Pro Wrestling Academy, and all the other great podcasts from Gene Jackson, Bob Smith, Dave Dynasty, and the boys from the Other Ship. And of course, all of those programs also available at your favorite podcast streaming platforms. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the Copia world, all the latest news, random thoughts, fun videos, pictures, and more, make sure to join the more than 33,000 followers over at facebook.com/WrestlingGrenade. Don't be left out. Please also follow us at the former Twitter, now X, at Wrestling Grenade, and subscribe to youtube.com/Wrestling Grenade. Would also greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review at your favorite podcast apps, guys, because every positive review makes our podcasts more visible in the algorithms, if you will, which allows us to continue to grow. Now, for those who have been asking about merchandise, WrestleCopia merch, you can find plenty of designs for our t-shirts, hats, magnets, stickers, coffee mugs, and more over at the TeePublic store. That is tpublic.com/user/WrestleCopia. And last but definitely not least, it's what keeps the entire machine going. I'm talking about patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Now with 3 major tiers and tons of Patreon exclusive next level content for our supporters. Remember, guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
I don't know if the cards were doing this in this era, but it was an interesting thing that up through pretty much, I think, 1974, whenever a new wrestler came in who was an African American, they would have his name, and then in parentheses, they would say Negro wrestler. And I don't know if they were letting the people know that, oh, we're going to have an African American in this town, so be ready. Okay. Or if they were marking it to the African Americans, because it was such a segregated area. And like I say, Hayti was kind of known as a black community. Malden would have been very much known as a white community. Mm-hmm. And the two communities did not interact at all in those eras. So it just interesting history that we see there. There was a guy named Jimmy Jones who worked from the late 60s, early 80s. I don't know a lot about him. He worked as an assassin at one point with another kind of low-level talent named Melvin Kimball. So that's the way you kill a gimmick, is you take a very famous tag team and then you put it on two underneath guys. He called them the same thing. Eddie Marlin. Eddie has an interesting history because he worked outlaw shows in Nashville for years. And then it wasn't until the late 60s that he kind of got in with the Gulas office. And his first full-time wrestling job was he was working as the Mummy in 1967. And then he'd worked as El Diablo, another mass gimmick.
The Dibble.
Earlier.
The Dibble.
Yeah, the Dibble, Eddie Marlin. But, people think that he was a big name in the Tennessee circuit, and he really wasn't. Right. He had that tag team run with Tommy Gilbert when his father-in-law was promoting Memphis. But other than that, Eddie was really not a top push star in the territory. Mm-hmm. Frank Martinez and Gypsy Joe, they were the Blue Infernos at this time. They were in their 30s. Gypsy Joe wrestled from 1962 to 2010.
Just ask New Jack if he was still here.
Yeah. I just saw a clip yesterday, I think, of Gypsy Joe in Japan. Had to be late in his career, and he's just taking chair shot after chair shot, and no selling it. And he's got blood just dripping down his face, and he's just standing there like, hit me again. I love it.
I don't know how old I was when I learned that he was El Grande Pistolero there, feuding with Danny Davis, like 87 years old, feuding with Danny Davis there on ESPN when I was a kid. Here I thought he was an up and coming junior heavyweight, and he was like, 412. But
Jerry didn't want to overpay for talent in Dallas, that's for sure.
Definitely not.
A guy named Rick Miller, who primarily was a part-time guy for Gulas, 66 to 70, but he also made appearances in Stampede and the WWF as the Terrible Turk. So he had a few short-time, full-time runs, mainly a part-time guy. Bull Montana, Tommy Montana, primarily a part-time guy, worked in East Tennessee as the Masked Claw. So that's kind of the level of guys. Let me skip down a little bit. So Rick Neal was a guy, his wrestling name was Rick Neal in Malden for years. He wrestled there for several years. His real name was Carl Reed. And later he would become Randy Tyler in the Gulf Coast territory. And there's a video of him teaming with Rocket Monroe against Jackie Fargo and Crazy Luke Graham. And you can tell it's like a revenge babyface match because they just start off hot and they're just beating the hell out of Randy Tyler and Rocket Monroe. But Randy Tyler was a good sized guy. He had the size to look like a professional wrestler,
right.
But he really paid his dues. Didn't stay in the business a ton of time. And there's a really tragic story that we'll be telling about him later, here I think it's in this segment. Jack Rico was named Sammy Riviera. He worked all over from 58 to 68, Gulas, Leroy McGurk, Capital Wrestling, Florida office. Bill Sky was Bill Bowman. Joe Sky was Joe Turner. They were billed as half brothers. I don't know why you would bill someone as half brothers versus like our mom was a slut. I don't know.
That is so peculiar because they're not actually related. So why not just, if they're using the same last name, why can't they just be brothers? Somebody did not want that bloodline, that complete bloodline.
Yeah, that's a very strange thing. My half brother. Well, they're closer than cousins, May. I don't know. That's a strange thing. They were major stars in Gulf Coast and Nashville, 68 through 70. As we talked about, they were making all the major cities. Bill Sky worked primarily from 60 to 76. He also worked a few WWF tapings in 1988, which I found hysterical. So like 12 years after his active career ended, he did a few TV jobs back when they were still just pulling in anybody to do that type of work.
And under his real name, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe Turner wrestled from 1990 to 84. From like 77 on, he was mainly like a TV job guy. So he had his top run and that ended and he still stayed on. Billy Spears, which is an interesting name. He was working as a wrestler at this point. He worked from the mid 60s to the early 80s, mainly known as a manager in the Gulf Coast territory. I love this story. The story was actually, there's a newspaper article I found on this. He allegedly once paid an undercover deputy sheriff to legitimately injure Austin Idol.
Oh, darling.
And Idol has talked about this as well. Like I don't know what the heat was, but there's like rumors that he like a legitimate bounty. Like he actually was putting like $5,000 out or some amount of money to hurt Austin Idol. So
I think Billy Spears got caught up in the pro wrestling game there, hiring people for bounty hunting and things. So.
Yeah. Wow. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And after that, there was a time he appeared at least once in Memphis in the mid 80s as a manager. He didn't stay long, as I recall, but he was on the TV show at one point. Mark Starr, who was the brother of Ricky Starr. Ricky Starr was a huge star in wrestling. Did very kind of like it was like he brought ballet to wrestling,
right?
As a babyface, it was kind of a very odd gimmick. He came there. Oki Yahama, better known as Katatsu Yamamoto. Did I say that correctly? Do you know that name? He wrestled for 25 years. And my favorite, Ed Younger, was a name I was not familiar with, but it was Stan Frazier.
I had never heard that.
So of all the gimmicks that you can give to Stan Frazier, add Ed Younger to that pile of gimmicks that you have for Stan Frazier.
Well, that's a new one. I will have to go and change my name list here, from... There were a lot of those back in the infancy of the internet. There were a lot of the alias lists and things online. We'll have to go and fix that. When you want to talk about Yamamoto, just for a moment, though, he was one half of the Yamaha brothers with Kentaro Hoshino. He was actually trained by Ricky Dozan. That's how far back he goes to the JWA dojos. Because Ricky did it first. Obviously, he was over here learning the business, and he would go back and create the business over in Japan. But yeah, to see some of the guys that he sent over here, those are the guys he had aspirations for, the guys he wanted to see if they could make it over here, like Baba, for instance, who was very successful over in the States.
Yeah, interesting. I did not know that history, but I felt like there probably was some level of history there with the name and the length of time that he was a pro wrestler. Mm-hmm. They did do a special show in Malden in December of that year. They weren't promoting Malden regularly. They did what was called as a Christmas show. So the headliner was Jimmy Hyde of Holcomb, so a local Holcomb, Missouri, small town in the Boot Hill, versus Bobby Rose, who was known as the Mississippi Plowboy. Mm. Now, I think we will know someone else who was later known as a plowboy from Mississippi. So everything old is new again, as they say, or however that goes.
I reckon.
Spider Galento was on that card. Chico Cortez. I thought this was interesting. There was a wrestler named Phil Rogers, and they wrote known as Phil Tyler on TV. So he's wrestling on TV under one name. He's wrestling locally under another name.
If he's hiding from the law, he's not doing a very good job with it.
Right, right, exactly.
That is really peculiar. There's some really interesting half brothers, and I'm this guy on TV, but I changed my name for the house shows, and that's kind of interesting.
Maybe he wrestles better when he's not on TV. Maybe it's a different name. All right, so let's go into 1968. We're still not into Malden regularly in 1968, but he starts promoting regular cards in Clarkton, Missouri, which is about 10 miles north of Malden. So it's very close. So he's got two towns now. He's doing Hayti on Thursday nights and then Clarkton on Saturday nights. Clarkton would start using more local guys. And then when we see it get in the 70s, it's very heavily local guys and very few name stars.
And just real quickly, too, I just did a little Google search while you were filling everybody in on that. To give everybody an idea of the population of these towns, Hayti, and this is in the 2020 census, so I don't know what it was back in this time period, but so Hayti is around 2,200, and the town of Clarkton is 950. And that's in today's world, but I guess it would have been just a little over 1,000 back then, based on what I'm looking at here in the census.
Right. And probably, my guess is he just didn't have a proper venue in Malden. Mm-hmm. And he was probably relying on people to drive the 10 miles from Malden to Clarkton for those shows.
Right.
Would be my guess. Hayti is interesting because it was known not just as an African-American community, but as a very poor community. So the idea that you're running these weekly shows in a very, poor community is kind of interesting. So we'll just do a sample card here in 1968. There's one in Clarkton. He's got Al Galento versus Roughhouse Gordon, who's a name I was not familiar with. And then you've got Rick Neal, who we talked about earlier, Phil Tyler versus Jerry Dean, and Country Jody, which was someone doing like a hillbilly gimmick, and I couldn't find out. So again, you see he's pulling in more local people here than the Gulas touring people. Some of the people that came in during 68, Cousin Slim was a part-timer named Marvin Cheatham. Rip Collins and Chuck Conley, the Scufflin' Hillbillies, which was a pretty name tag team during that era. Everybody had a hillbilly gimmick tag team, it seems like, in the 1960s. The Sundown Kid, I like that name, the Sundown Kid. Somebody named Emerson Kosher. This guy worked from 1947 to 1972. and he was teaming with Johnny Walker in a few Memphis main event matches in 1969. And of course, Johnny Walker would later become wrestling too. So Jim Dalton, a guy that worked a lot of gimmicks. He worked as a Fargo. He worked as a medic. He worked as a Mephisto. He was there. He was 25 years at the time, so he was pretty young in his career. Red Shadow, Dick Dunn under a hood. Dick Dunn also worked with Billy Garrett as the Mighty Yankees at one point. The Mighty Yankees was such a popular heel tag team gimmick that they would just take different guys and put them under the mask and call them Mighty Yankees. So you could have Mighty Yankees in different cities at the same time.
Kind of
but
like Dork.
still, yeah. I mean, if you grew up in the South, even like I did in the 1970s, Yankees was like a horrible insult to call someone. It was like you just slapped their mother if you called them a Yankee. So, different times.
Wow.
Let's see here's a name I knew you would enjoy. I got here. Buster Gordon. This is our Roughhouse Gordon. Real name Charles Weir. Later worked as Enforcer Louisiana. Or Luciano.
Yes.
Enforcer Luciano in the Los Angeles territory. So I know you've talked about him in the past.
He's quite an interesting being to watch on film. That's for certain. I mean, there's stories of him in Mid-Atlantic, delivering a dead fish to Bob Caudle, who had not seen the movie, so he didn't even understand the reference. Bob was somebody should have filled Bob in before that segment, but I think he even worked as Noble Price, aka as some of the bulletins would refer to him, Nobel Price. So kind of like Nobel Prize. I always thought that was kind of down in Amarillo as well, and even made some stops off in Japan. Unfortunately, me and Dan Gennady have had to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, he never got good, but he hung around forever. Yeah,
my notes, he was active from 64 to 73, and then again, like full-timer 80 to 81. And I think that 80 to 81 period was when he was in Mid-Atlantic and in Los Angeles.
And he did a little Amarillo before that. There's a lot of those ads out there. So I think he was doing Amarillo at the end of the 70s as well. So it does appear he disappeared for a little bit there in the mid-70s.
Yeah. Sylvia Hackney, which is just a fun name for me because she worked in an office in Memphis with my high school buddy for years, and she would just tell him about the wrestling business and compare it to prostitution, basically. Dennis Hall showed up in Hayti during this year. Of course, famous name in Memphis. And what was it, the 80s? He tried to come back at some point doing some
singing cowboy with his version of Dolly Parton by his side. I remember that.
Yeah, Rocket Monroe. Rocket Monroe was advertised a couple of times during the year. At one point, he was actually on the Gulas circuit. At one point, he wasn't. So I don't know if that was a fake advertisement or if he came in for a one-shot. But it's hard to believe that you're working in Dothan, Alabama, and you think, hey, I need to make this one shot in Hayti, or not sure that makes a whole lot of sense. Mitsu Katayana, Mexican wrestler, Marcario Hernandez. He worked from 53 to 80, so he had a long career. Sarah Lee, the wife of Corsica Joe. Yeah. She was trained by Mildred Burke and started wrestling in 1958. So she was 37 years old here. Pepe Lopez, he was part of the Mass Dominoes tag team with Frank Hester in 1975 when they died in the car crash with Sam Bass. Ken Lucas made it. Frank Morrell, Paul Morton. So, a lot of names that you would associate later with Memphis wrestling in different ways. Anybody else interesting here? Manny Soto was the brother of Roberto Soto, and he worked from 63 to the mid-80s. Mm-hmm. I think it was Dutch Mantell who had an actual backstage fight with Roberto Soto after a match did not go well. Les Thatcher made an appearance there. Tim Tyler, who would later held tag team titles with Tarzan Tyler. Tojo made one appearance. And the interesting thing I thought was they did not make a big deal out of Tojo appearing, even though he was such a big star in the Memphis territory. It was just on the ad like another guy. It wasn't. And I looked, and he had wrestled, I think, in Knoxville the previous night. So he had to drive from far east Tennessee to southeast Missouri, probably about 6 hours. Wow. To make that shot. Yeah. Mac York, who was the brother, Paul Morton, his name was Mac Morton. And I think he was the first guy that Lawler actually wrestled in the Mid-South Coliseum, was Mac York. He made it up there as well. So you had some guys that returned from previous times. Dwayne Peele was up there a lot. Buddy Wayne. Saul Weingroff made an appearance. He was certainly a huge star in Memphis at that time. Eddie Marlin was back under a mask as one of the Blue Demons. So he couldn't get a mask off him at this time. And then you started getting this group of local wrestlers who a lot of them would become the core of what he would do, certainly in the 70s. Phil Tyler, who we mentioned earlier, Bill Deaton, Jerry Lovelace. I mean, these names aren't going to mean a lot to people. There was a guy named the Black Panther that he just used for years.
Forever. Till the end.
Yes.
It seemed like, at least till the end of the Terry Justice files anyway.
Yeah. And then there was a local guy named Eddie Freeman who was really involved. Sometimes they would call him the promoter. He would work as a referee. He would get involved in angles. So I think he was also a military veteran. And they would use some really funny names. We're going to get some really odd, funny names where they just recycle names from like famous figures in popular culture. So some of our good names here in this time period, we have Jimmy Rogers. Mm-hmm. I don't think a singer, and then a Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart.
And so, yeah, so you'd see them like using names like Kit Carson or whatever. I don't know, just strange things. A story, August 1st, Memphis girl killed in head-on auto collision. It's really interesting. They start with this terrible tragedy, and then they end the article with a wrestling angle.
Wow, it doesn't get more wrestling than that, man.
So check this out. Betty Sue Reed, 9-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Carl Reed, and I put the future Randy Tyler, was killed Saturday morning in a head-on automobile accident near Van Buren, Missouri. Mr. Reed is better known to area wrestling fans as Rick Neal. Reed was scheduled for a wrestling match at Clarkton Saturday night under his ring name, Rick Neal. He was booked for a match with Cousin Jody, and a $500 appearance bond had been posted. Due to the accident, the purse was forfeited to Cousin Jody, who refused the money under the circumstances. The purse is being held by the State Athletic Commission. So you've got 3 sentences about this poor 9-year-old girl dying in a car accident, and then you immediately go to working the readers about the next event.
What was the point? I don't know. I mean, are they trying to bring it back? So we got the purse money held up. Are we running at an angle in the middle of? I'm not even going to go there.
It's crazy. And, and I read these and they're written like newspaper articles.
Yeah, it sounded like one to me.
And you can tell a lot of times it's just Henry Rogers or somebody in his office writing some kayfabe thing, and they just print this stuff without any, evaluation of it whatsoever.
I wonder if it was common back then to note, though, that this is their real name and this is their stage name kind of deal. That's interesting, too. And in all of this, I don't want to lose the fact that, unfortunately, a young girl lost her life. But the whole thing is just weird to me, to go from his daughter passes away to, oh, by the way, this is his real name. This is his wrestling name. And then there was an angle, and we're going to build to the return match.
Yeah, really bizarre. Really bizarre. I guess they were doing very well, and particularly in Clarkton during this time phase. In August 3rd, they said a sellout is expected. Advance tickets may be purchased at the Daisy Queen in Malden. And then on September, they said bleachers installed to increase seating capacity. So they were doing big business in Clarkton, but that must have stopped in 1969 because 1969 they're running Hayti and Clarkton, and they do that through October, and he stops running those towns, and then he starts running Malden again, and then he runs Malden from the 70s to the early 80s. And this is where we get the transition, not so much Gulas wrestlers, pretty much local guys. And we'll get into it more in the next show, but just gimmick matches up the wazoo. Like a mid-card match could be a chain match. It just, you didn't have to be headlining to make sure there was some blood for the people to enjoy.
You got to figure out an angle to bring the people in, I suppose. I guess gimmick matches is a way to go until you burn it out. Then you're going to have to figure. I don't know that they ever burned it out, at least not by Henry Rogers' admission anyway, because we know that's going to continue on for some time to come here. But so Malden wasn't always Malden is one takeaway we have right now. In fact, it wasn't Malden at all here for a little bit here in the late 1960s. It was rather Hayti, and then they added Clarkton to that voyage, that trek back and forth. But you say here going into 69 or so, that we're going to start losing some of the Gulas, or pretty much the Gulas office is dipping out, and Henry Rogers is going to go at it alone here. So like you said, business started to be for them to rent the bleachers. They must have been, selling some tickets, some serious tickets there in the late summer of 1968. But apparently by mid 1969 to go into the fall of 1969, the fans said, they ain't coming back. Been there and done that, I guess, at that point. They'd seen their wrestling. They got their fix or whatever the case may be. Maybe the talent was already gone by that point. I'm not really sure what the story would have been here, but you can kind of see things change. Certainly they change.
Yeah. And it may just be that instead of Clarkton, he just found a better facility for the matches in Malden and said, okay, let's just do it in Malden. Most of my fan base is from here. And, I don't have to pay my booking fee to Gulas for my shows.
It almost feels like, I'm not there. I'm not Henry Rogers or anybody else involved, but it almost feels like he always wanted Malden. And like you said, after the big tent went away, he didn't really have a place to run in Malden, so he tried to run as close as he could at the best cost that he could until he could find a place in Malden. I feel like Henry Rogers was looking for a place in Malden this entire time, and maybe he finally simply just found it.
Yeah, that's probably the case. And since he lived there and his business was there, it would have been much easier for him to promote there versus, driving, especially to Hayti, which has been 45 minutes. I mean, not a huge drive, but anyway, here's a sample card, and you can kind of tell like the difference in the names. This is June 28th, 1969 in Clarkton. So we have six wrestlers on the card, not unusual. Main event is Jimmy Hyde and Bill Bray versus Babe and Tuffy Taylor in a chicken wire match.
At least they're honest.
Babe and Tuffy Taylor were in their real life or storyline brothers. And they would be regulars throughout most of the 70s. And then both of these were 2 out of 3 falls with 60-minute time limit. The opener was Jerry Dean versus Cousin Jody. Mm-hmm. So you can tell, okay, I've got 6 wrestlers. We're going to do potentially, 2 out of 3 falls. They probably did 6 falls, right? You don't win 2 in a row. So,
not often, no.
Yeah, so you were promised close to 2 hours of wrestling with 6 guys and 2 matches. And here is going back to Malden now in October of 1969, and we have a 7-man royal match. They didn't call it battle royal. They called it royal match, which was interesting. So check out these names. El Marauder 1, El Marauder 2, Jerry Dean, Rick Neal, JoJo Sumo, Eric Von Bronner, and Jimmy Hyde. So Eric Von Bronner is the only guy that had any name value of any of these guys. Wrestling show moved to Malden. Professional wrestling will return to Malden Saturday night after an absence of 3 years. The matches are being promoted by Henry Rogers and will be held at the Malden Wrestling Arena. The arena is located on the 2nd floor of the L.K. Ashcroft Building, Main and Madison Streets in Malden downtown. So basically they had an old downtown building, was probably an office building or something at one point in time that had been cleared out. And so he starts using that as his wrestling facility. Later on, he would have the barn type facility that you would hear people talk about. But I think for about 5 years, he was in the 2nd floor of this downtown building, which had to be a little bit odd, I would think, as a wrestling.
I hope the ring stayed up. That would be a pain in the ass to put up and take down.
Well, that's true.
I guess do you know for a fact or not if he's still running Hayti at all?
I did not see any cards there after that point. There's a pretty good listing of cards on like the, some of the wrestling sites that have those historical records.
Okay.
And I did not see any.
So
I think
it's safe to say wrestling went away from Hayti, and unfortunately, based on that being, as you mentioned, like a poverty area, I doubt these fans that were attending, that were, making it a slight success at least, are probably without wrestling moving forward. I don't see them making the 45-minute trek to go watch wrestling here in Malden.
No. I mean, as someone who grew up in that area at that time frame, 45 miles away might as well have been on a different planet. You just did not travel that far.
Understood.
I mean, unless you had some sort of medical emergency or something. I mean, every community was self-contained back then. Every community had their Sears catalog store and their grocery stores and their general stores. And you might go to the next town for clothes or something like that. But this was before a lot of the big chains had taken over. It was just a different era of life back then.
Simpler times, man.
Simpler times. But Malden seems to be happy to have wrestling back. So on October 11th, they have a main event of Jerry Dean versus Rick Neal. Notice the wrestling fans. The Malden Wrestling Arena, located at Malden, Maine in downtown, will be enlarged by Saturday night to seat an additional 200 persons.
Wow.
So that sounds crazy. That I don't know what the original seating was.
Right.
But they must have missed wrestling there in Malden to need 200 additional seats.
Presuming that this is not an arena-sized room that they're holding these these shows, then you have to imagine that the fire marshal is getting paid under the table to allow it to expand to an additional 200 seats. But that's almost like the bleachers in Clarkton in regards to business seems to be doing okay for Henry Rogers right now.
Yeah. They never mentioned business not going well. Henry was an old school carny in terms of this promotion. That's right, for sure.
Yeah.
Some of the faces that we saw in 1969, and it could have been in one of these three towns, most likely in Hayti. Rex Allen, who was known as Bill White, he teamed with Ed Wiskoski as the Mighty Yankees in Florida in 73. Mm-hmm. And then he was working underneath in Charlotte in the early 1980s. So old Mid-Atlantic fans are probably familiar with Bill White.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry Barber, kind of a long time, generally underneath babyface in the Gulas territory, made an appearance. Who else that's interesting? Levon Stone was a guy whose name would pop up every now and then. And he actually worked at the same factory that Phil Hickerson worked at in Jackson, Tennessee. And he's the person that got Phil Hickerson into the wrestling business. Right. So a lot of people assume that it was Herb Welch because of being in East Tennessee, but it was actually Levon Stone that got Phil Hickerson in. Lily Thomas, the African-American woman who would later marry Jim White, which would make Jim White unemployable in Southern wrestling territories because he married a black woman.
It's kind of crazy to think about that. But I've done some digging and research into that before because I didn't really know a whole lot in the story, and it was maybe a year or so ago. I don't know why I was going through that, but it might have been something we were discussing too when we were covering the Gulas stuff in the past, but with the Jarrett split. But when I came across it, I hadn't realized that. And that's kind of here today, gone tomorrow, simply because you're getting married. It's crazy.
Yeah, the Jarrett's, I think, quote on that was he had too much heat in the locker room, and it just wasn't worth, booking him to have the entire locker room upset. And again, when I talk about, growing up in that era and how segregated it was, I mean, people don't really understand. It was 100% segregation.
Yeah.
Herb Welch would still make appearances, and he was still making main event shots in Memphis every once in a while as well. So at this point, he would have been 58 years old, I believe, and still making. This was an interesting card in December. We would be in Malden now. The opening match, Don Bass versus Tom Gilbert. Before he was Tommy Gilbert, he was Tom Gilbert. Mm-hmm. And when I look in like the wrestling results websites, neither of them are wrestling match before this. And this one isn't listed on any of the sites. So this had to be one of the very first matches that Don Bass and Tommy Gilbert had.
And working with each other too. So the blind leading the blind, so to speak, here early in the business. But it's fun because we know what's going to happen with Eddie Gilbert and his training and coming through here later. So Tommy said, if I started there, son, you can too. But yeah, that's a good call, going back and trying to find early results for these two. You may have discovered the earliest we may ever find anyway.
And, and I don't know, they may have been trained together. And sometimes guys who are trained together have their first match together.
They have a match figured out.
Yeah, right. They've worked out their match. And at this point, Pepe Lopez and Jerry Barber were also working as the Mighty Yankees. They were booked on this card. Don't know if it was those guys. I thought this was interesting when they talked about the television, radio, and newspaper coverage for wrestling in this area. It says, see these well-known TV show wrestlers. These stars can be seen every Saturday on WHBQ TV Memphis at 3:30 p.m. on Channel 13. Okay, that's the Memphis wrestling we all know and love. Saturday at 5:30 on Channel 13, Poplar Bluff. Now, I grew up less than an hour from Poplar Bluff. I never heard of it having a TV station. So I don't know if that station lost its license at some point or it was just never part of what we could view in our area. And I don't know who would have been having the wrestling show. I mean, that's very odd to me. Like, was it a copy of like a Memphis tape or I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I don't know anything about Poplar Bluff other than I remember it being either the penultimate or the final show for ECW when they were running the house shows. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Channel 3 in Harrisburg, Illinois, which is also interesting because I don't know who would have been running TV in Harrisburg, Illinois at that time. Okay. Later, Phil Golden probably had TV there when he had his All-Star promotion. The Poffos definitely did with ICW. But I don't know who would have been having that television. So that's interesting, just trying to piece together. And if people know these things, please share it with us. This is for Malden. Listen to KSIM Sykeston or Portageville Radio or this newspaper. So they're advertising the cards on two different cities on the radio and in the paper. So that was just kind of interesting. We'll have another television show that will pop up in the 70s. Which was in Jonesboro, Arkansas, carrying wrestling, which I don't remember at all. I would have been about 9 years old. And I don't know if that was just doing the Memphis tape or doing interviews, because at that point, they were running Jonesboro every Saturday night. So I don't know if they ran the crew over earlier before the shows and just did a local show to promote that night's show. I mean, it had to be that in some way.
Right.
But that's interesting that you had these shows in these very tiny markets running wrestling as well. I just kind of wanted to set that table for the 1960s, just to say, here's how we got to Malden. Here's how we got to where Malden would become. We went through several steps in this process and journey. And then in the early 70s, we'll have some very entertaining Mario Galento stories. And we'll see all of the wrestlers from Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling showing up in the territory. So, and also a very major star in the 1980s will start his career in Malden in the next show.
Very cool. Yeah, we got a few names. I won't spoil a few names that people will know, certainly from the 1980s, that will stop through Malden on their way to superstardom over the course of the late 70s and throughout the 1980s. We'll save those names for next time, but we heard one of their fathers' names mentioned here. But we've got so much more to get into because we haven't even got to the point of where I started learning about Henry Rogers and Malden. So I want to thank you so much, Steve. I told you before we went on the air, this was a Steve Crawford special because you did a lot of digging here into this particular episode. I tried to cover basically 75 forward, and you did an amazing job here. When you sent me the research notes, I was like, wow, okay, so you could see the Gulas and Welch influence immediately. Well, Herb Welch is on the show, but you know, Bobby Whitlock was there and Red Roberts and some of these other names that I know came through the Tennessee territory by this point. So very cool. And some other random names that popped through that I would have never guessed.
Right.
Antonio Inoki, just one of them pops back into my head right off the bat. It's peculiar. I should have known that, but it's lots of great history here for the 1960s. Fun to know that it kind of started off as a little branch of the whole Gulas and Welch, the territory there. And, the local promoter was going to be Henry Rogers, it would appear. And then at some point, he just now that he's home again, it feels like, I think you kind of alluded to that. Now that he's home again in Malden, he doesn't really need, maybe he doesn't need the Gulas office anymore. He's like, I know these boys. I can handle these boys. I know this town. I live 3 minutes down the road. I got this covered now.
Right. And basically, if you were going to those wrestling matches in that era, you just wanted to see a fight, right?
Right.
You wanted to see a brawl. You wanted to see action. I don't think that, certainly if somebody has a name off television, that's great. But otherwise, there's nothing to do in these towns, right? There's nothing to do. You might have a movie theater that runs a movie on Friday or Saturday night. And at one time, the cards were starting at like 9:00. So I'm thinking, oh, he's starting these cards after people can go to the 7:00 movie and then go to the wrestling matches, because that's the only thing that would have competed in terms of entertainment during that time.
In town, right. Yeah. Expand your possible potential of profits, so to speak.
Right.
Making sure everybody is free to do whatever they choose to do at night. And that's going to draw pretty much anybody, from the guys at the bar to teenagers, or whatever the case may be. They get out of the movies and they got nothing else to do. And now we're going to go watch the wrestling matches. So very smart. I really wouldn't have guessed that they would have started a show that late, but that's pretty damn cool. That's very intelligent. Like you said, very carny, very crafty. And I'm looking forward to see where we go from here, though, with them.
We've got a lot of interesting history to cover, so it's going to be fun. I'm thinking we'll do 3. I think we got the 60s. I think we'll do 1970 through 75-ish, and then 76 through 81, 82-ish, and that'll kind of wrap it up. But a lot of very interesting history, and as I say, a lot of names that people are going to know from watching national TV in the future.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting there, guys. And Steve, I want to thank you again for doing this with me. There's, like I told you offline a day or two ago, there's a handful of outlaw, the little small, promotions that really caught my eye in the fan bulletins, going back when the Terry Justice stuff started leaking out and things online years ago. I go, what is Malden? What is this town? And so I learned a lot from there. And then, of course, I did a lot of digging myself. But to have you here, man, it's a blessing for us at Regional Rasslin and WrestleCopia to have your research and your memories and the knowledge of the area, too, to be able to kind of tell us how things were. That really helps just create a whole visual of the entire situation.
Yeah, and I was talking to Brian Trammell about some of the outlaw towns in Kentucky and Tennessee, and he said there were basically 2 levels. There were ones that the local promoters considered real outlaws and considered pests and hurt business, and they didn't want them there. And there are others that they were okay with. Mm-hmm. And I think Malden was like one of those towns. It's so remote, and you can help send trainees there. Mm-hmm. And so even though they may not have had a formal relationship, it wasn't hurting their feelings that this guy was running this town every week.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why Gulas had Henry handling business there to begin with. I don't think Gulas and Welch really wanted to promote the town themselves. So it makes sense with the population so low too. I get it. They're focusing on the bigger cities and whatnot, but damn, man, I'm looking forward to coming back here, talking about the 1970s, going into the mid 1970s, see what transpires next. And I'm looking forward to hearing about Phil Golden and the All-Star crew coming through.
Yeah. Good stuff. A lot of names, that people will know for wrestling history coming through.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to it, guys. We're going to wrap up this week's edition of Regional Rasslin. Thank you again, Steve, for being here, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys. Many projects are a-brewing, so stay tuned. The next episode of Regional Rasslin right around the corner.
All right. Thanks, man.